All right, if you have a Bible, the book of Numbers. Book of Numbers. Old Testament. That's the plan. All right, book of Numbers. If we could spend the beginning of this by kind of doing a separate study, but we'll just briefly mention it to kind of set everything up. If you go through the Bible, start in Genesis, go all the way to the book of Revelation, there's different phrases or different ideas used to kind of describe the Christian life, right? We know that the Christian life is described as a race, right? I think we could say that the Christian life is also kind of described as a walk, right? A race, a walk. Now we could sit here and talk about how are those illustrations similar? How are they different? Because obviously they use those terms to emphasize a specific thing or certain ideas. But with both, you get the idea that the Christian life it's a movement. There's progress. There is going in a specific direction that you're trying to get somewhere. A lot of different concepts comes up with it. So we're going to use this idea kind of like, we'll use more like kind of a walk, more of the idea of the Christian life, but we're going to use a passage in the Old Testament to kind of talk about the Christian life and maybe what it should look like. I've said numerous times in numerous sermons that I've always struggled with exactly what the daily Christian life should actually look like. I've said that numerous times. Like what should not a pastor, not someone in a monastery, but the average Christian, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. What should it look like? Now, obviously, you have responsibilities, things you have to do. You're supposed to be doing those things for the glory of God. But you also know that the reason you come here is to be equipped to do ministry. So what does the ministry of an average person look like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday? What does ministry look like? You know that there are scriptures that talk about things you're supposed to do. So what does that look like? I don't know if anyone has a good answer, but I know that I think sometimes the average Christian doesn't really think about it. Like, they're a Christian, I live my life, I kind of do what I want, and I come to church, and then that's the end. And the Christian life has to look a little different than that in some way. Now, the passage we're going to use to kind of look at some principles, obviously our life can't look exactly like theirs because they're in a very unique situation in history. We're in the book of Numbers. That should give you an idea. But I think we can learn some principles from it and see what we can do. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 to 23. Just a short little passage, which should mean it should be a short little sermon, but it's not going to go that way. So we'll see. I don't want to turn this into some lengthy series, but at least we will look at it. We'll read the passage, and then we'll back up, provide kind of some context, and then we'll see what we can take apart from this section. Numbers chapter 9, verse 15. And on the day that the tabernacle was reared up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, namely the tent of the testimony. And at even there was upon the tabernacle, as it were, the appearance of fire until the morning. So it was always. The cloud covered it by day, and the appearance of fire by night. And when the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, then after that the children of Israel journeyed, and in the place where the cloud abode, there the children of Israel pitched their tents. Verse 18, and at the commandment of the Lord, the children of Israel journeyed, and at the commandment of the Lord, they pitched. As long as the cloud abode upon the tabernacle, they rested in their tents. And when the cloud tarried long upon the tabernacle, many days, then the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and journeyed not. So it was, when the cloud was a few days upon the tabernacle, according to the commandment of the Lord, they abode in their tents, and according to the commandment of the Lord, they journeyed. And so it was, when the cloud abode from even until the morning, and that the cloud was taken up in the morning, then they journeyed, whether it was by day or by night that the cloud was taken up, they journeyed. Or whether it was two days, or a month, or a year that the cloud tarried upon the tabernacle, remaining there the children of Israel abode in their tents and journeyed not. But when it was taken up, they journeyed. And the commandment of the Lord, they rested in the tents, and at the commandment of the Lord they journeyed. They kept the charge of the Lord at the commandment of the Lord by the hand of Moses. All right, very wordy. And probably when you read it, you feel like it's saying the same thing a lot. Okay? But there's a lot here to unpack, so we're going to unpack it. Let's try to provide us some context. This is a passage found in what book? Book of Numbers. All right. Now, in the book of Numbers, there's a lot of discussion here that concentrates on the journey of God's people from Egypt to the Promised Land. Everybody remember that? They're in bondage. God delivers them, and they're going to finally get to go to the land that was promised all the way back in Genesis. Everybody remember this, right? They're on their journey. Okay, pretty basic stuff, all right? Now, most of the events in the book of Numbers occur in what we would refer to as the wilderness, right? Sometimes we refer to their wilderness wanderings, right? Or the wilderness journey, okay? The word wilderness appears in the book over 40 times according to at least one source. I didn't count, but around 40 times. That would tell us that this is a book about what? The wilderness wanderings or the journey in the wilderness. Remember I said there's a lot of ways to describe the Christian life, a race or a walk. Well, this would be a long walk. A long walk to get to where they were supposed to go. A journey. You get that kind of image. So we can already see, okay, we could probably use this to draw some principles. Now remember, we have to realize that a lot of this refers only to their historical situation, but there's some ideas that we could take from it. All right? Numbers records the history of 2 generations. The generation that left Egypt but refused to enter Canaan. That goes from Numbers chapter 1 to Numbers chapter 14. Right? So let's do this. How many generations does Numbers record the story of? 2. What's the first one? The generation that left Egypt but refused to enter into Canaan. And that goes from Numbers chapter 1 to Numbers where? 14. The second generation is the generation that followed after them. Chapters 15 to 26. However, if you read, do note, so everybody got that? What's the 2 generations? Generation number 1? The generation that left Egypt for where? To go to Canaan, but they refused to enter in. Numbers 1 to 14. What's the second generation? The generation that followed after them. Chapters 15 to chapter 26. Please note, however, right, there is an overlap of generations in chapter 15 to 25. There's an overlap in chapters 15 to 25. Both are present during that time, and one is what? Dying off, and the other one is getting ready, all right? Only 2 people from the first generation, Joshua and Caleb, all right, entered the promised land with the second generation, as it was because of their trust in God, all right? So that, everybody get the basic story here? We got 2 generations. One generation, their destination is what? Death. The other generation's destination, promised land. That's already a weird dynamic. Agreed? That's a very interesting dynamic. And that's that kind of, we could draw some illustration from that. In your Christian life, you meet people with different destinations, do you not? Okay, different destinations give you what? Different motivations, different priorities. Correct? Right? We could talk a lot about that. Now, the book of Numbers, centers around 4 major events. All right? 4 major events, and the book easily divides into 4 sections. All right? So it centers around 4 major events, and the book divides easily into 4 sections. Now, obviously, the book itself contains the story of 2 generations, but there are 4 major events, and the book divides into 4 sections. So let's kind of give an outline of the book. You ready? The first event or section we would call the consecration of Israel at Sinai. The consecration of Israel at Sinai. All right, the consecration of Israel at Sinai. That's chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 10, verse 10. Chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 10, verse 10. The consecration of Israel at Sinai. Everybody got that? Number 2, the rebellious generation in the wilderness. Chapter 10, verse 11 to chapter 25, verse 18. The rebellious generation in the wilderness, chapter 10, verse 11 to chapter 25, verse 18. Now let's just stop right there. This story is amazing. And if you think about this, this story is kind of amazing. You have an entire generation of people who know they're never going to make it. Know they're going to die, yet they're a part of the journey. You talk about a difficult circumstance. Like, how does that work? Right? How does that work? You could probably preach some sermons right there, but okay. So we got that. What's the first major event? The consecration of Israel at Sinai from chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 10, verse 10. What's the second? The rebellious generation in the wilderness, chapter 10, verse 11 to chapter 25, verse 18. Number 3, the preparation of the new generation. The preparation of the new generation. This goes from chapter 26, verse 1 to chapter 30, verse 16. The preparation of the new generation, chapter 26, verse 1 to chapter 30, verse 16. And number 4, preparation for war and entry into the promised land, chapter 31, verse 1 to chapter 36, verse 13. All right, let's see what we've learned so far. The book tells the story of 2 generations. What's the first generation? No, the book is broken into 2, tells the story of 2 generations.
The generation who left Egypt.
But refused to enter into Canaan. Chapters 1 through 14. Everybody remember that? Everybody got that? All right. And the second generation? The generation that followed the first, and that goes from chapter 15 to 26. The book can also be centered around 4 major events and broken into 4 sections. Section number 1, the consecration of Israel at Sinai, chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 10, verse 10. Number 2, the rebellious generation, chapter 10, verse 11 to chapter 25, verse 18. Number 3, the preparation of the new generation, 26:1 to chapter 30, verse 16. And number 4, preparation for war and entry into the promised land, chapter 31, verse 1 to chapter 36, verse 13. All right, everybody got that? Yes? Okay. Now, just remember what I'm about to give you. This is very important. Remember this. This is going to come back to play big when we get to our chapter 9, 15 to 23 passage. A central focus in the first 9 chapters is the tabernacle. A portable temple, or tent, I think is a way I would state it, where the presence of God resided. Because of its significance, the Lord defined the duties of the Levites and their helpers. With the tabernacle in the center, the 12 tribes camped beside the tabernacle with 3 tribes on each side, indicating God should be the central focus of their lives. Please remember that. I'm going to repeat that a lot. To help them live as a covenant people, God provided instructions about relating to Him and to one another. Before beginning their journey, Moses led the people in the second observance of the Passover as a reminder of God's deliverance. By being obedient to God's commands, He would lead them home to the promised land. All right? So, main thing is, for the first 9 chapters, what's the central focus? Tabernacle. Keep that. And another focus is God giving them the commands and how to live and how to interact with one another and to God. Keep that in mind, because that's going to be very important here. All right? Now, we looked at chapter 9, verses 15 to 23. Correct? All right. Now, I could give you a full outline, but that's not what I'm going to do. We're going to just kind of outline it as we go along, I like to do that. So we're going to work on it. So let's look at two verses. Chapter 9, I know we've already read them, but let's read them again. Chapter 9, let's read verse 15 and 16. Everybody there? Chapter 9, verse 15. And on the day that the tabernacle was reared up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, namely the tent of the testimony. And at evening there was upon the tabernacle, as it were, the appearance of fire until the morning. So it was always, the cloud covered it by day, and the appearance of fire by night. Two verses. All right? Now, if you were doing an outline, what would you call these two verses? Okay? Okay, God's arrival. Okay? Anybody else got an idea what you would call them? We've read it twice. Do we need to read it 5 times? And then one of those times out loud? No. Covering of the tabernacle? Okay. All of you are trying to observe the content and get it in your title, so that's fine. That's what you're supposed to do. I refer to this, and a Bible study guide that I was looking at referred to these two verses the same way. And Stephen used the word, the presence. The presence. Now, some, when they refer to the presence here in verses 15 to 16, what presence do they focus on? God's presence, and that's visibly how? In what way? The cloud and the fire, right? Okay. I wanted to look at it differently. I think in two verses we have the presence of two things. What are those two things that is present in these two verses? The cloud. Oh, you're missing. Remember, I told you when I read that last paragraph that you need to remember it. That there's something that's emphasized in the first 9 chapters. What was the first thing? Tabernacle. What do you see in these two verses? Tabernacle and the cloud. Right? Now you could say the fire as well, okay, but it's associated, correct? Right? Why? You can't see the cloud at night. Exact. But it still deal with the presence of God, right? So, two things are present in these two verses. The tabernacle and the visible manifestation of God. Would that be a good way of saying it? Or a visible manifestation of God's glory. I think that's a correct way to state it. Correct? All right? Agreed? So we have two things that are present here, and we're going to look at what these things teach us about the Christian life. Now, we're only going to look at... I want to look at both. I don't know if we're going to make it, but we're going to look at the first one, and what's the first thing mentioned in verse 15? Tabernacle. All right, the tabernacle. So we're going to look at the tabernacle because this is very important to this whole thing. Now, give me some other names for the tabernacle. Tent of meeting. Okay, good. Tent of testimony. Very good. Look at that. I'm done. Okay, y'all are actually answering questions and getting them right. My job here is finished, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave church. Okay, all right. Because if I keep asking questions, okay, so we've got to leave you at an A+. Okay, all right. All right, but no, the tabernacle is also known as the tent of testimony and the tent of meeting. Now, just a little bit about the tabernacle, a little bit about the tent. It was surrounded by a fence, providing a courtyard where cleaning rituals were performed at the altar of the burnt offering and the bronze laver. The tent itself was divided into how many sections? 2 sections. And what were those 2 sections? What's the first section? Called? Holy place. Very good. And what was in that section? Okay. Golden lampstand, the altar of incense, and a table with how many loaves of bread? 12. Why? A tribe. Look at you guys. Yeah, Bible scholars, man. Yeah, good. All right, that's good. All right, the second section was called the Holy of Holies, sometimes referred to as the holy place. All right, and of course, a veil divides it. correct? Could anyone enter into even the tabernacle itself? No, okay? And only very few people could enter into the Holy of Holies, okay? And only for a specific purpose, okay? All right. And what was located in the Holy of Holies section? The Ark of the Covenant. Now, what was inside the Ark of the Covenant? Now we're going to have a little controversy. All right, I'm assuming you're going to go with the traditional answer. And the traditional answer is the 2 stone tablets. Right? Yes? Manna. And you said Aaron's rod that budded. That's very important. Just keep that in mind, that budded, okay? All right. Now, go to 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 9. I believe it's 1 Kings 8, 9. And tell me what you discover in 1 Kings 8, 9. When you get ready to answer, tell me where I can get close so the mic can pick it up. Is that true? Are you sure? Okay. All right. 1 Kings 8, 9. I believe it's 8, 9. Yeah, 2 Kings won't help you in this particular case. I mean, it may still help you, but just not in this to answer this question. There was nothing in the ark except... Okay, well, why do we think that there's all these other things in it? Are you sure? Okay, I understand. Do you have a verse that would back that up? I will argue that where we typically find the answer, go to the book of Hebrews. Not written by Paul. Okay, no, I don't know. I just say that because then people will get so upset and fight over things like that. I'm like, does the book identify the author? No. Then why are we fighting about it? Okay, right. If someone wanted us to know the author, I would have probably told us. Okay, all right. Here we go. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 1. Then verily the first covenant had also ordinances, divine services, and a worldly sanctuary. For there was a tabernacle made, the first wherein was the candlestick, and the table, and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant. Now, let me just I'm not getting into a whole debate and argue here. If you read the way it's written in Hebrews 9, some will argue that's not saying it's inside it, saying that it's before it, around it, near it, connected to it. Lots of discussions about it. You get into arguments and how you interpret it. Like, I bet you translations are very different here. How does the NIV render Hebrews 9:4? Okay. All right, that makes it very clear that it was in it. And here it says which the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot, seeming to imply that it's possibly in it. Now, do you have a cross-reference to Hebrews 9:4 that leads you back to the Old Testament? Okay, you got a cross-reference to Exodus 25:10? Okay, well, go to Exodus 25:10 first and tell me if that tells you, that speaks of them putting those things inside it. Just telling you how to make the ark, okay? So Exodus 25:10 doesn't help, correct? Okay, you had Numbers 17. Okay, look at Numbers 17:10 and tell me if it speaks of these things being placed inside it. Now, see, these are the things many pastors would not do during a sermon, but this is why sometimes it takes us forever to finish things. But shouldn't you know this, right? Shouldn't you know that this exists? Okay. I think you should. Does number 17 help? Right. Doesn't say in it. So there is some dispute here. Here's what we know. Can 1 Kings be true? Everyone should say yes. Can Hebrews be true? Are they contradicting? What's okay? They both can be true because is Hebrews speaking about what was in the Ark of the Covenant at the time of 1 Kings? We don't know. It's just saying that at some point we're in there, and 1 Kings at some point it was saying what was in it. All right. So to be a contradiction, what would be required? That both texts say on the third day of the fourth month in the year of this is what was in the tabernacle, and both passages say mark the exact time and give the exact contents. That's not what occurs. So, remember, for something to rise to a level of a contradiction, it has to meet the area of a contradiction. What we see is it seems possibly that the contents evolved over time. Now, we could argue that what was inside always was just the tables of the commandments, and that these other things were apart, before, connected to. Don't know, but these things are important, okay? Does that make sense? So, what do we have then? We have the presence of the tabernacle, right? And inside the tabernacle, we have the Ark of the Covenant. Everybody got that? We have the Ark of the Covenant. Now, what I want to do, so let's just do this. Let's do a couple of things. All right. Let's consider the tabernacle itself. Let's consider the tabernacle itself in regards to our Christian life. All right. Now, we know that the tabernacle, as they traveled in their wilderness journey, they carried what with them? The tabernacle, right? And when they stopped, they did what? Set it up. And what occurred once they set up the tabernacle? Well, how were the rest of these tents arranged? Okay. Right. What was the center? Tabernacle. Everything was sent. The tabernacle was the center of their daily life. The tabernacle was the center of their daily life. Let me state that again. The tabernacle was the center of their daily life. If you go to certain neighborhoods, you still see how it used to be designed, right? Especially in Omaha, you would see this, or at least it felt like it. I mean, it's been a long time since I've been to Omaha, but when I moved there, I got this sense, or at least in certain parts of Omaha and the surrounding little communities. But you see it if you go to, in Abilene, if you go to Jeanette Street. You have Sacred Heart Catholic Church in a pedestrian area. Right? It's not off on the highway, right? Like a lot of churches now, the churches look for the optimal place to get the most traffic, right? Okay, but that's not the way it used to be. It used to be you wanted the church where? In the center of a neighborhood, because what was supposed to be the center of their lives? Church. And what would happen at different times of the day? The bells would ring, signifying even the passage of time and marking time, right? And that would be the church you would go to when you were a baby. That'd be the church you would be catechized at. That's the church you would be baptized in, the church you'd be married in, and then one day buried in. It was the center of life. Yeah, and many of them have schools, right, exactly. So that was your life. The church was your life. So I want to make this very clear that for Israel, what was to be the center of their life? The tabernacle, which was connected with which issue? The worship of God. The worship for the Christian life, what is to be central is the worship of God. Now again, how do we translate that to modern times? Right now, the early church translated it by doing what? What did they do every single day? Well, they had church service every single day. Remember, they met daily? Right? They met daily? Okay, right? Over time, they developed the liturgy of the hours, where you had readings at certain times of the day and prayer. Why? Because the passage of time was to be marked by remembering God, because it was to be central. Now, obviously, the early church met every day. That doesn't happen anymore. other than in many Catholic parishes where they have a daily Mass. But Protestants we kicked that to the curb quick, right? We're like, that's too much of my time, because we all say we are too busy. Now, please note, there's a difference. I'm too busy, or I'm too busy, but if I got rid of this, I'd have more time. You see the difference there? Now, sometimes you don't have a choice. Other times it's because you have made a choice. It's hard. And I don't know how, but again, this gets down to the Christian life. This is what we can say. What is supposed to be central to our life and our walk? God. Now, what that looks like, I don't know, but that's the way it's always been designed to be. God is supposed to be central, and it's a picture right there. The tabernacle is there. Our life is to be built. They camped around it. We are to build our life around God. Here's the problem. I don't think most Christian families are built around God, and I think many kids raised in a Christian home, I'm just going to be blunt, I don't think they perceive their parents really being that committed to God. I think they may be committed to going to church, but I think they see that my parents live the way they want to. I don't want to live the way they want to. And it's a difference of what you want, not a difference of God versus no God. It's a difference of they want church and this religious stuff, I don't. I don't know if they really saw God being the centrality of our life and taking the preeminence in it. Just a part of it. Kind of like you can choose one hobby over another hobby, and they could probably look at many people's hobbies, people are more committed to their hobbies than some Christians are committed to Christianity. I mean, I can pick some people with some hobbies, and we can bring them in here just to talk about their hobbies, and you listen to how much they know about their hobby, how much time they spend about their hobby, how passionate they are about their hobby, and you take the average Christian. And it's funny that those people are very busy, but guess what they have time to do? Their hobby. I wonder why. It's their God. And many Christians are saying, no, but God is the real God. And they're like, that's your... here's a guy who, they're committed to video games. They're like, I'll show you commitment. That's your commitment? You're that committed to God, and I'm this committed to video. My commitment to video games surpasses your commitment to God. That means your God is pretty pathetic. And I will argue that there's many people who show a greater commitment to video games, books, hunting, cars, you name it. And then there's the Christian saying, but no, those are all idols. God's what's important. Okay, well, then what do you do with... I don't really have time to do... I don't have time to study. I don't really have time to do anything. I don't have time. Okay, well, glad to see that commitment. Israel, they lived their life with what was being central. Tabernacle. Now, we do know that even though the centrality of God in their life did not necessarily mean they lived a godly life, right? But that deals with the reality of sin. But we should be a little committed about that, because we can say, well, God should be central in our life. And I just sometimes I compare the life of a Christian to the life of someone who their hobby is this, and you'll see the level of commitment, and you're like, this side wins. And that's not for God. That's for earthly pleasure. I'll give you an example here. As soon as I get done, I'll be going home. I'll turn on my television to watch the Survivor Series pay-per-view. And as soon as the video package is done and all the pyrotechnics explodes and they pan to show the ring, in the front row, I guarantee you, I'm going to see 5 people who have been at every pay-per-view I have ever watched since 1980-something. Okay? There's going to be a guy with long hair who wears glasses, and sitting next to him is his mom, who's now, I don't know how old she is. They're always there. Next to him will be a guy in a green shirt. Yeah, always wears a green shirt with a baseball cap. Always there. He was at the pay-per-view last night that we were watching. Right? And next to that is this woman that used to look young. Now she looks a lot older with her husband sitting next to her. There. Next to the guy in the green shirt, he's a smaller guy. He doesn't wear the same clothes all the time, so it's hard to sometimes detect him. Somewhere behind or next to them will be a younger guy. He's been there forever, and they're almost always in the front row. Sometimes they'll be over to the side, but almost always in the front row of every single pay-per-view. There are, at a minimum, 12 a year, requiring them to travel all over the country. And they're at every single one. That's commitment. That's commitment. This weekend, they've been at 2. All right, they're going to be at the second one. Why? They love it. They're passionate about it. I've met them a couple of times, sat next to them a few times, right? And it's just like, no, I go. Some of them, at least the guy with long hair, he follows other wrestling companies, not just the WWE. He'll be in Japan at a pay-per-view. He'll go everywhere. Why? Commitment. Commitment. Now you say, well, he obviously has a lot of money. Well, maybe that's besides the point. You can show your commitment in a lot of different ways. That's commitment. Now, that's just one example that I've witnessed year after year. Even Landon and Liam are like, those guys are always there. They've even caught on. They're like, they're always there. That guy's at every paper. I know, Landon. I want to be them, okay? I want them to adopt me. I want to be their friend, okay? But I'm just saying that in the Christian life, when we say God is the centrality of our life, we talk a big game. Right? We look at the world and like, those things will never satisfy. Only God will satisfy. What you need is Jesus above. And we sound so good, right? And then we live our lives, and I think the people who know us are like, that's your commitment? I'm more committed to my favorite TV show than you are to Jesus. Give me a break. Have you ever met sports fans? They know every statistic, right? He's caught 15 passes this year, last year 14. He has a QB rating, this quarterback has a QB rating, and he won this game and this game. And you're like, and they traded this person. The people who do fantasy football, oh, that is like consuming. They live their lives. That's for sports. They know every statistic, know everything. And you get Christians, and that's why sometimes I get frustrated. You ask a Bible question, and they're like, I don't know the answer. Yeah, let me go ask that. Let's go to Buffalo Wild Wings and throw out some football questions. Are they going to know all the answers? Oh, man, they're going to be... And they'll start arguing about it, right? Like, no. This game... And here's the statistics. How many champions? Look at all these champions. Look, well, wait. We've produced this many Hall of Famers. Well, we've produced... And you're like, oh, my goodness. How do you even know all of this stuff? Why? It's their life. What should be our life? It's supposed to be, I don't know what that looks like. Make sure you hear what I'm saying. I don't know what it looks like. Like when I was a young Christian, I thought I had it figured out what it looks like. I didn't figure it out then, but after all these years later, I still don't know what it looks like. But it should convict us, right? That if He's the center, then we should live a life as if He is the center. What's really the center of our life? Let's be honest. We tore the tabernacle down. We packed it up, we sent it away, and we moved our tent right into the center, and we said, this is my tabernacle, and I am the God that I worship. Now, we would never say those words, but our lives demonstrate what it is. And I know it's hard. It's hard. I think it's easier when you have kids. It's very difficult. Because if you make all kinds of sacrifices to put God the center, they may not ask for that. You know what? They may raise their hand and go, wait a minute. Right? And you can't blame them in the sense, especially if they're not regenerate. If they're not regenerate, like how do you work that in a family dynamic? And if you have lots of kids, I don't even know how you work into that dynamic. Because you like, well, we should do this. We shouldn't have this, and we shouldn't have this, and we shouldn't do this because God is the center. And then your kids grow up and they're resentful or hateful that they didn't get to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G because your God became the center of their life and they didn't ask for your God. Okay, I don't know how you work that, but that's a difficult thing. But no matter how it looks, it's something we should consider. So, the tabernacle is there. It's the center. Now, what is in the tabernacle? We've already talked about all the objects, but the one I want to focus on is the Ark of the Covenant. All right? Everybody got that? And what's in the Ark of the Covenant? Okay, well, we know this. We know, we're going to go with what Hebrews listed, because Hebrews listed them. All right? Let's look at what is contained in it, and we'll see what we can do with this. All right? Go back to Hebrews 9. I think it's verse 4. Okay. What's the first thing they have listed? Okay. Okay. And then what's in it? Okay, stop right there. All right. First thing they have is manna. Okay, right? Now I don't have a lot of time to go through all of this, but what does manna, if we're going to use this as kind of a picture of the Christian life and how we should look at it, what would the manna kind of picture for us? Okay, God's provision, right? Agreed? Okay. Can we say it shows a picture of daily bread? Okay. Does everybody remember how the whole thing started? I don't want to get into it. They were wandering in the wilderness. They didn't have any food. They started complaining. God provided them manna, bread from heaven. All right. There were rules. Go out and gather it. Okay. And you couldn't store any. Right? If you stored it, what happened? It would rot. Okay. Exactly. Except for Friday, they could gather twice as much because they were not to gather on the Sabbath. Okay. But it was to teach them to trust God for what? Daily bread. Agreed? For provision. To trust God for provision. Now we pray in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day, to trust God as being the source of our daily provision. So on one hand, the manna is to remind us that while God is the centrality of our life and our Christian walk, we are to trust God for our provision, for our daily need. I do believe that, but we do know that the manna, Jesus takes the manna, right, the illustration, and removes it from physical food and applies it to whom? Himself. Everybody know where that shows up? Gospel of John. Go to John chapter 6. Yep, John chapter 6, verse 31, the text says, Our fathers did eat manna in the desert. As it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. All right, that speaks of Numbers, right? Book of Numbers. I think it's chapter 11 they're referencing there. Then Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father gave you the true bread from heaven. He makes sure he corrects them. It wasn't Moses, it was God who gave it to them. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven and giveth unto the world. Then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. He takes the manna and he applies it to himself. So as we are living the Christian life, God is to be central, but what are we to remember? God's daily provision, and that provision is not necessarily a physical provision, even though we are to trust God for our daily bread, but ultimately it points to Christ as being our spiritual provision. The manna is a reminder that when we live our Christian life, what do we need daily? We obviously need Christ, the bread of life. He's our spiritual provision. Because without His spiritual provision, we have death. We don't have eternal life. Correct? Yes? Okay. All right. So very important. Now that doesn't mean when we eat, we don't see God as the source of that food. It's just a reminder that what's ultimately more important, our physical health or our spiritual? Our spiritual. All right. What's the second thing listed in Hebrews chapter 9 as being inside the ark, or at least that's how it seems to read? Well, we know the stone tablets are there. Would everyone remember that? Okay. What does the stone tablets remind us of? The commandments. The commandments. All right? Agreed? Okay? Reminds us of God's law. Yes? Now, please note, look at Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 to 23. Go back to Numbers 9, 15 to 23. We have to hurry here. Look, 9, 15 to 23, the passage we started with. Go through 15 to 23 and count how many times the word commandment or charge of the Lord, some kind of phrase like that. The commandments of the Lord, commandment, at the command of the Lord. How many times some kind of phrase that refers to the command or charge of the Lord is mentioned in Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 to 23? I don't know. You tell me. Okay, so do we have an agreement that verse 18 is the first time it shows up? All right, then from verse 18 to 23, how many times do we see something that refers to the commandment of the Lord? Got at least 8? That's a crazy number, is it not? 18 to 23? 5 verses, 8 times at a minimum? Agreed? Right? This speaks of God's commandments, God's commandments. So, as we listen, as we live the Christian life, if we walk the Christian life, we think of the presence, right? And the presence of the tabernacle in their life as a reminder that what is to be the central presence in our life? God. And what do we focus on as we walk with God as the center and presence in our life? We remember His provision, ultimately in the person of Jesus Christ. And secondly, we are to remember His commandments. His commandments should be central and present in our life. Wherever God is, His commandments are, right? Because He's connected with His commandments. How much did the commandments impact Israel in Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 to 23? They didn't move without it. They didn't start without it. They didn't stop without it. And once they stopped, they didn't start again until He commanded. Now, they had the visible presence of God to go forward, but it says at His commandment, right? In other words, until He commanded, they did not go. We are to live our Christian life following, thinking, meditate. That's why we are told to meditate. Blessed is the man who meditates on God's law day and night. The law has to be central in our life and our Christian walk. God has to be present. He's central to it. We have to constantly be remembering Jesus Christ as our daily bread, as our sustenance, that we need that, and we have to be consumed with God's law. Now, there's one more thing put inside the ark. What's the other thing? Aaron's rod that budded. Now, I cannot go into this as in-depth as I had originally planned, right? But we'll talk about it. You ready? What does a rod signify? In Hebrew culture, it was usually used as a symbol of authority. Psalm 23 talks about that the rod, look at Psalm 23, I think verse 4. Look at Psalm 23, 4. What is the rod spoken of there in Psalm 23, 4? I think it uses the term staff. King James. Uh-huh. Your rod and your staff, they what? Comfort me. It shows comfort. It shows guidance as well, correct? Would you agree? Comfort and guidance. Because the shepherd has the authority to comfort and to guide. Look at Psalm chapter 2, verse 9. I think Psalm chapter 2, verse 9 speaks of a rod again. 2:9. What does it say in 2:9? Shall break them with a rod of iron, showing power, authority. So the rod can be an instrument of authority that can be used to comfort, can be used to guide, and it can be used to punish. All right? But it's a sign of authority. However, when we speak of this rod that's been placed inside the ark, it's not just a rod. It's Aaron's rod that had what? That budded. All right? Does anybody know the story of this rod and its budding and everything about it? Does anybody know the story here? Go to Numbers chapter 17. Oh, we're going to run out of time. I don't know if we're going to be able to pull this off. Okay. All right. And number 16, does anybody know what happens in number 16? There's a rebellion, right? All right. Just start in verse 1. We'll try to read some of this quickly. All right. Now Korah, the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan, Abram, it gives all the names of all the people here, okay? They took men, and they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. And they gathered themselves together against Moses, and against whom? Aaron. And said unto them, You take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, even every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. They simply basically say, hey, we're just as good as you. Why are you in charge? We're just like you. All right? And when Moses heard it, fell upon his face. And he spake unto Korah and to all the company, saying, Even tomorrow the Lord will show who are his, and who is holy, and will cause him to come near, and unto him even whom he hath chosen, and he will cause to come near unto them. This do, take your censers, Korah, and all his company, put fire therein, and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow, and it shall be that the man whom the Lord doth choose, he shall be holy, and take ye too much upon you, ye sons of Levi. Moses said unto Korah, Hear, I pray you, ye sons of Levi. Right? Seemeth it but a small thing unto you that the God of Israel hath separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord and to stand before the congregation to minister unto them. And he hath brought thee near to him and all thy brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee, and seek ye the priesthood also. For which cause both thou and all the company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that ye murmur against him? And Moses sent to call Dathan, Abiram, the sons of Eliab, which said, We will not come up. All right, so they don't even want to go along with the whole plan. All right. It is a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of the land that floweth with milk and honey, to kill us in the wilderness, except thou make thyself together a prince over us. Hey, it was just a small thing to bring us out of bondage. Just a small thing. You know, in other words, you got a rebellion going on here. Agreed? Moreover, thou hast not brought us into a land that floweth with milk and honey, or given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will thou put out the eyes of those men who will not come up? Hey, you haven't even delivered on the promise, right? So they're it sounds like a typical Baptist business meeting, okay, all right? And Moses was very wroth, I bet he was, okay, I can't imagine, and said unto the Lord, Respect not thou their offering, I have not taken one ass from them, neither have I hurt one of them. And Moses said unto Korah, Be thou and all thy company before the Lord, thou and they and Aaron tomorrow. And take every man his censer, put incense before them. They took, I'm just now going to skip down, they took every man his censer. Korah gathered all the congregation against unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the congregation. And the Lord spake unto Moses unto Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. Uh-oh, that didn't go so well for him, did it? Hey, we're just as good as you. We don't need you. And God just said, hey, go ahead and step to the side. I'm going to kill all of them. Pretty serious. And they fell upon their faces and said, O God, the God of the Spirit of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will thou be wroth with the congregation? And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the congregation, saying, Get you up from about the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, Abiram. And Moses rose up and went with Dathan. We get the idea. He spake unto the congregation, saying, Depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men. Touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed with all their sins. So they got up from the tabernacle, right? You see everything that's taking place here. And then verse 29, If these men die at the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me, but the Lord make a new thing, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up with all that appertaineth unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, that you shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. And then what happens? All right, horrible situation. You have rebellion, right? It all comes crashing down. Everyone agree? All right. Now, if you go to Numbers chapter 17, after all of this happens, you have death, you have all of these things. Aaron returned unto Moses, verse 50 of chapter 16, to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the plague was stayed. They intercede. They ultimately stop God from destroying everyone. It stops. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and take every one of them a rod according to the house of their fathers, of all their princes according to the house of their fathers, 12 rods. Write thou every man's name upon his rod. All right, now we get all these. Everyone's going to get a rod, okay? What's going on? A staff. What's going on? And thou shalt write Aaron's name upon the rod of Levi. Now, why is that significant? The priest. For one rod shall be for the head of the house of their fathers, and thou shalt lay them up in the tabernacle of the congregation before the testimony, where I will meet with you. And it shall come to pass that the man's rod whom I shall choose shall blossom, and I will make to cease from me the murmurings of the children of Israel, whereby they murmur against you. Ultimately, which rod buds? Aaron's. It blossoms, right? Produces fruit, right? Okay? It did, yes. Okay. Now, what is significant about this? All right? This is very important. Now, I don't have time to get through all of this, but this is very important. Once that rod blossoms and it produces fruit, that signifies that Aaron and Levi had been set apart and chosen by God to be what? The priest. The rod inside the tabernacle, which was in the center of their lives, as we live our lives, God is to be the center of it. The manna reminds us that we are to daily remember that Christ is our provision, our daily bread, our bread that we need, right? The commandments remind us of the law, the tablets remind us of God's commandments that needs to be central of our life. And guess what the staff or the rod represents? The priesthood. And we need a priest. And who is our high priest? Jesus Christ. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. So that rod doesn't just show authority, it shows priesthood. When his rod blossomed, it showed that Aaron and his, remember what name they wrote on it? Levi. They were now to be the priests to produce spiritual fruit in Israel. Christ is our high priest to produce spiritual fruit in your life and my life. So as we live the Christian life and we walk, what needs to be central? God. The tabernacle represents that. As we live this life, what other things are to be, what goes along with God being central? Manna. We need bread. God provides our daily sustenance, but He provides what? Our spiritual bread, which is Christ. Agreed? Okay. What else do we need? Do we need law? Absolutely we need law. We don't inherently know what's right and what's wrong. We need the commandments of the Lord. What else do we need? We need a high priest. Why do we need a high priest? Because we daily sin. We need someone that we can confess to, someone we can come to. We need a priest. All of that is provided for us, but it's to be central in our daily life. We are to live our life with these things. Are those things present in the center of Israel? Yes. We need those things. Somehow those things has to be instrumental in our daily life. So they had the presence of the tabernacle, and then the presence of the cloud is a reminder of God's presence that was with them. And what did Jesus tell us? He would never leave us. He is present with us in the person of the Holy Spirit that indwells us. Just as God indwelt the tabernacle, He indwells us. So what we see in Numbers chapter 9 is the presence of two things. What are those two things? Tabernacle and the cloud. What do we learn from that in your Christian life? What's to be central in our life? Okay, God. Right? God is to be center in our life. And the tabernacle shows that we are to build our life around God. And then what's contained in the Holy of Holies are things that are symbolic of our Christian life. We need manna. Yes. Daily bread, which is Christ. We need commandments, God's law, which we have in His Word. And we need a high priest, which is shown by Aaron's rod that budded. Right? The cloud shows to be a reminder of God's presence, which is always with us. Sometimes we act as if it isn't. All right? Now, that's as fast as I could go through that, but I think that's some good stuff. Now, we didn't even get close to finishing the passage, but there's plenty there to chew on. I hate that I had to speed up there at the end because I really wanted to work out that whole thing with Aaron's rod, but I think did as good as I could with the time that we had. All right, some good lessons there. All right, I'll stop because we've gone an hour or maybe more. All right, let's pray. Lord God, we come before you this evening. Lord, I hope people will really think about this. These are some very important things we just talked about. Lord, how to build our daily life where you are the center is the struggle of every Christian. What that looks like, how we are to do it, I don't know if anyone in this room has the answer, but it is something that we should strive for and think much about. And I'm just grateful for all the things you have given us. Those things in those things placed into the ark of the covenant are symbolic of the things you have given to us. And it's something that we should be thankful for and meditate deeply on. And we ask this in Jesus' name. And God's people said,